I want you to try something before this story starts. Get down on the floor, right there, on whatever you are standing on. Now imagine it is not carpet. Imagine it is driveway gravel, the sharp kind, the kind that is really just crushed rock with edges on it. Put your palms flat against a wall above your head. Now hold that, not for a minute. Hold it for 5 hours. You cannot. I could not. A grown man's knees quit somewhere around 40 minutes, and after that the body starts doing arithmetic you do not want to know about, involving muscle protein and kidneys and how much of yourself you can dissolve into your own blood before somebody notices. A 7-year-old boy held it from dinner until 1 in the morning because a man told him he was not allowed to move until he said so. That is where this one starts, and I am telling you at the top so you understand exactly what the father was looking at when he pulled that shed door open. What he did in the 60 seconds after is the reason I pulled this story out of a stack of 40. He did not scream. He did not swing. He counted, and then he went and found the one thing in that entire county that had been quietly keeping a written record the whole time, in a language nobody up there could read but him. My name is Nathan. Come on up the mountain. Brogan Teal made his living inside the small, honest cold of other people's machines. He was 41 years old and he owned a refrigeration company that fit in the back of one truck and one van, which is a sentence that undersells it, because the truck was a boxed Ford with $11,000 of gauges and recovery gear bolted into it, and the van belonged to a 66-year-old man named Boz Kellum, who had forgotten more about ammonia systems than most engineers ever learn. Teal Cold Systems, Nettleton Gap, North Carolina. Walk-ins, blast cells, ice machines, milk tanks, and, the part that paid for Keaton's dentist, forensic cold chain work. That last one is worth explaining, because it is the whole spine of what happened. When a truckload of pharmaceuticals arrives warm, or a restaurant loses $40,000 of scallops, or a dairy co-op finds a whole tank soured, somebody has to say why. Insurance companies do not accept feelings. They accept the record. And every serious cold box built in the last 20 years keeps a record whether anybody asks it to or not. A little controller mounted by the door, blinking away, writing down the temperature every 60 seconds, logging every defrost cycle, every compressor start, every single time the door opens and the warm world leans in. Brogan read those logs the way other men read tracks in mud. He could look at a jagged line on a laptop screen and tell you the freezer had been opened 9 times in 4 minutes on a Tuesday, that somebody had propped the door with a milk crate for 22 minutes, that the unit had been unplugged at 3:14 in the morning and plugged back in at 5:40 to hide it. He had testified in 2 civil cases. He had a rule he said out loud so often that his son could recite it in a bored little monotone from the back seat. People lie. Paperwork lies. Machines just tell you what happened. He had a rule about people too, but he had stopped saying that one out loud because it had gotten uncomfortably close to home. The home was a 1972 brick ranch on Fentress Road with a heat pump he had rebuilt twice and a boy in the back bedroom named Keaton. Keaton Teal was 7 and small for it, with his mother's straight dark hair and his father's habit of asking one more question after everybody else had stopped. He collected bottle caps. He could name every compressor in his dad's van by the sound it made. He had a laminated card in his backpack, made by his father, that said "Who I Call" and had 3 numbers on it, and he had never had to use it, which Brogan considered a personal achievement, and which the boy's mother considered an embarrassment. The boy's mother was Adair. Adair Teal had been Adair Dunmier for the first 26 years of her life, and the difference between those 2 names was the difference between 2 entirely separate counties, even though they were 11 miles apart. The Dunmiers had been on Sawtooth Ridge since before the road was paved, which was 1961. They ran Dunmier Game Locker and Custom Cutting, a low white cinderblock building with a gravel lot and a hand-painted sign of a deer standing in a way no deer has ever stood. In November, it was the busiest place in Bramwell County. Hunters backed pickups to the bay door with bucks in the bed and came away with white paper packages labeled in grease pencil. The rest of the year it did hogs, beef halves for families who bought a cow together, and a little sideline and smoked sausage that people drove up from Asheville for. It was, on paper, a legitimate small business with 4 employees and a wall of yellowed state inspection certificates. Brogan had married into it with his eyes about half open. He had liked Adair immediately and completely. She had a laugh like something breaking in a good way, and she had wanted out of that ridge so badly you could feel it standing next to her. He had liked her father Hoyt less, and her older brother Enoch less than that, and her younger brother Creed not at all. From the first Thanksgiving, from the exact moment Creed had reached across the table, taken the last biscuit off a 9-year-old cousin's plate, and held eye contact while he ate it. That is a small thing. Brogan had filed it anyway. He was a man who filed small things. For 9 years the arrangement had worked because Brogan enforced a border. They went up the ridge for Christmas Eve and the 4th. Keaton was allowed to ride the four-wheeler in the lower field with an adult present. Nobody in that family had a key to Brogan's house, and nobody in Brogan's house went up Sawtooth after dark. It was not a rule he had announced. It was just a shape their life had, the way water has a shape. Then, over about 14 months, the shape changed, and, this is the part he would go over 1,000 times afterward, it changed slowly enough that he had watched it happen and called it something else. Adair started driving up on Saturdays. Then Wednesdays. She said her mother Nadine's hip was bad. It was. She said Creed had asked her to help with the locker's books because the woman who did them had moved to Boone. That was also technically true. She stopped putting her phone face up on the table. She got a second checking account and told him it was for the boys' school things, which had never before required its own bank. And Keaton, who used to talk from the driveway all the way to the kitchen, started coming home from Sawtooth Ridge quiet. Brogan asked. Of course he asked. He asked in the truck, which is where boys talk, and he got. It was fine. He asked what he did up there, and got. Helped. Helped with what? Carrying. Carrying what? Boxes. He had asked Adair, once, on a Tuesday in September, standing in the kitchen with the pilot light of the old range ticking. He had said, plainly, without heat, I do not want him up there working. She had said, Brogan, it is his family, and he had heard the word family used as a lever, and had not liked it, and had let it go anyway, because it was late, and because he had a compressor swap in Marion at 6 the next morning. He would spend a considerable portion of the following year remembering that he had let it go. The night everything came apart, he was supposed to be in Charlotte. There was a hospital there, a big one, 11 floors, a pharmacy cold room full of things worth more per ounce than anything else in the building, and they were taking bids on a redundant chiller and a full monitoring retrofit. It was the largest contract Teal Cold Systems had ever chased. Brogan had spent 3 weeks on the proposal. He had bought a shirt. The meeting was set for 6 in the evening, because the facilities director worked late, and Brogan had told Adair he would stay over and drive back in the morning, and she had said that was smart, do not drive that mountain tired, and had kissed him goodbye with what he later understood was relief. The meeting ended at 6:41 p.m. It ended early because it went well. It went so well that the director shook his hand at the elevator and said, we do not need to do the song and dance, send me a start date, and Brogan Teal stood in a parking deck in Charlotte at 10 to 7 with the biggest job of his life in his pocket and no one to tell. He called home. It went to voicemail. He called again from the interstate. Voicemail. He was not alarmed. He was, if anything, buoyant. He stopped at a place off 74 and bought a chocolate cake with a plastic dome over it, the kind that costs $11 and is worth about $4, because his son liked the plastic dome. He drove the 2.5 hours up out of the Piedmont and into the dark folded country where the radio gives up, and he got to Fentress Road at 12:20 in the morning with a cake on the passenger seat. The porch light was off. Adair's car was in the drive. The house was warm and smelled like the house. He set the cake on the counter, and because he was a father before he was anything else, he did the thing he always did before he did anything else, which was to go stand in his son's doorway for a second. The bed was made, not slept in, and pulled up. Made, the way it had been made that morning, with the quilt square and the stuffed raccoon sitting on the pillow at the angle Keaton always left him. Brogan stood in that doorway with a chocolate cake still cold in the kitchen and felt the floor of his own life go soft. He found Adair in their bedroom, awake, sitting up against the headboard with her phone screened down on the quilt beside her, which is a detail he noticed and set aside for later, the way you set aside a bolt you find on the floor of a machine room. Where is he? Brogan said. She did not startle. That was the second thing. A woman woken at midnight startles. Adair looked at him the way you look at weather you had already seen on the radar. He is at Creed's, she said. He is fine. It is a sleepover. Brogan Teal had a temper. He had spent his 20s learning to run it through a smaller pipe, and by 41, he had gotten good enough at it that people mistook the result for calm. He stood in the doorway of his own bedroom and felt the pipe start to sing. We agreed, he said. He does not stay up there. You agreed, she said. And then, softer, in a voice that was trying to be reasonable and only managed to be tired. He loves it up there, Brogan. Creed is teaching him things. He is a boy. He needs men around him who are not just you. Call him, Brogan said. It is midnight. Call your brother. She picked up the phone, and he watched her hesitate for a quarter of a second over the screen, and that quarter second is the exact place where his marriage ended, though it took another 11 weeks for the paperwork to catch up. She dialed. It rang out. She said, "See, they are asleep," and put it down with a small performance of finality. Brogan said, "Okay." He said it in a way that made her look up. He took his keys off the counter. He did not take the cake. He drove out Fentress and up 226 and turned onto Sawtooth Ridge Road at 12:51 in the morning. And he did not call ahead. And the reason he did not call ahead was not suspicion, not yet. It was that he had spent 20 years walking into other men's kitchens unannounced to find out why the ice cream was soft. And he knew, in a way that was almost a professional reflex, that you never learn anything about a system by telling it you are coming. The Dunmier place sat at the top of a cut, house first, then the gravel yard, then the long white cinder block locker with its bay door, and behind that a metal equipment shed and, further back, the tree line going up Black Rock Bald in a wall of black. The house was dark, every window. Creed's truck was there. Enoch's truck was there. Hoyt's old Silverado, which had not run in 3 years, was there where it always was, growing a little more into the ground each season. Brogan parked at the bottom of the yard out of habit, never block a bay, and got out into the cold, and the gravel under his boots made the sound that gravel makes, and he stood there for a second in the total mountain dark and listened to a house full of trucks and no people. Then he saw the light. It was in the equipment shed, low and yellow, leaking out around the bottom of a sliding door and through the gap at the jamb. It was not the shop light, it was smaller than that, a drop light maybe, or a bare bulb on a cord. He walked around back. He would say later that he already knew, and that is probably not true. What is true is that his body knew something, because he found that he was walking very quietly, and that he had put his phone in his jacket pocket instead of his hand, and that he had noted without deciding to, that the shed door slid left, and that the track had been greased recently. He put his hand on the handle and pulled it open. The shed smelled like two-stroke fuel and cold cement. There was a four-wheeler in there, and a chest freezer along the back wall with a padlock hasp on it, and a rack of tools, and a bare bulb on a hook throwing a hard little circle of light. His son was kneeling in that circle. Keaton was on the gravel. The shed had no slab, just packed dirt and the same crushed rock as the yard, spread thin. He was in his school clothes. His knees were down and his palms were flat against the cinder block wall above his head, arms straight, elbows locked, and his forehead was resting against the block between them because his neck had given out at some point, and that was the only way left to hold his head up. He was shaking, not crying, shaking, in long, slow waves that started at his shoulders and went down. Brogan Teal did not scream. "This is the part I need you to sit with," he said. "Hey, bud." And Keaton, without turning his head, without taking his hands off the wall, in a small polite voice, the voice of a child who has learned the rules of a place, said, "Uncle said I can't move until he says." The clock on the shed wall said 10 after 1. Brogan asked him one question, and he asked it flat, the way he would ask a night manager when the door alarm first went off. He said, "When did you start?" And his son said, "After dinner." I have talked to a lot of people about the 60 seconds that came next. Brogan crossed the shed, and he did not pull the boy's hands off the wall, because a part of his brain that handles cold rooms and rescue training had already flagged it. You do not rip a body out of a position it has been locked into for 6 hours. He knelt down beside him on the same gravel. got his own knees down in it, and felt it, and let himself feel it for exactly as long as it took to understand the arithmetic. And he put one hand flat on his son's back and said, "I am going to say the word. I am going to say it, and then you can move. Okay?" "Okay," Keaton said. "Move," Brogan said. The boy's arms came off the wall like something cut down. His hands did not work. His legs did not work. When Brogan lifted him, the knees would not straighten. They had locked at that angle, and there was gravel embedded in both of them, pressed in so far that later at the hospital, a nurse would take it out with forceps and put the pieces in a specimen cup, 22 pieces, and Brogan would keep that cup for a year. He carried his son out into the yard. And halfway across that gravel, with the boy's face in his neck, and both of them breathing the same cold air, Keaton whispered. And he whispered it. He did not say it. He put his mouth right against his father's ear and got it out fast, like something he had been holding since dinner. "Dad, look in the freezer." Brogan Teal stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the Dunmier yard at 1 in the morning with his son in his arms and the shed light behind him and the dead black house in front of him, and every instinct he had built in 41 years was pulling him toward that white cinder block building, toward the bay door, toward whatever was in there that a 7-year-old had decided was the most important sentence he owned. And he did not go. That is the decision this entire story turns on, so I want to be precise about why. Brogan Teal had testified twice. He had sat in a deposition room and had an attorney spend 2 hours trying to establish that he had touched a thermostat before he photographed it. He knew, not in theory, in his body, that the difference between evidence and a story is who was standing there when it got looked at. If he broke a padlock at 1 in the morning on his brother-in-law's property, whatever he found became a thing he had found. It became a thing a sheriff could describe as tampering. It became a thing a defense attorney could put in a jury's mouth as the desperate act of a man in a custody dispute, which, he understood, standing right there, faster than he wanted to, is exactly what he was about to become. He had one asset in his arms, and it was his son. Everything else was a machine problem. So he did 3 things in the Dunmier yard, in this order, and each of them took under a minute. He got Keaton into the truck and started it, and put the heat on the floor vents, low, not high. He walked back to the shed with his phone out and he filmed. 31 seconds. The open door, the bulb, the wall, the 2 clean palm-shaped patches in the dust, at exactly a 7-year-old's reach, the depression in the gravel, where the knees had been, the padlocked chest freezer, the shed clock reading 1:14. He did not go inside past the doorway. He narrated the timestamp out loud, once, the way he did on every service call, because a video with a spoken timestamp is a different animal in a courtroom than one without. And then he stood in the middle of that yard, faced the dark house, and he did not yell. He honked the horn, 4 times, long. Then he drove down the mountain with his son, and behind him, in the rear view, one window in that house lit up, and then another, and then the porch, all at once, like a thing waking up that had never actually been asleep. The emergency department at Bramwell Regional is 9 beds and a hallway, and at 2 in the morning on a weeknight it is 1 physician, 1 tech, and Brogan's sister. Perrin Teal was 38 and had been a nurse for 14 years and had the specific unsentimental gentleness that job builds in a person. She took one look at her brother coming through the doors carrying a boy whose legs were still bent, and she did not ask a single question in the waiting room. She got them into a bay. She got the curtain closed. Then she looked at Keaton's knees and said, quietly, to nobody, "Oh, honey." The physician on that night was Dr. Anaya Talwar, 4 years out of residency, who had come up from Charlotte because she wanted to practice somewhere she would see everything. She saw everything that night. Here is what the chart said, and I am going to give it to you the way the chart gave it, because the clinical language is somehow worse than the plain kind. Bilateral patellar and pretibial abrasions with embedded gravel, 22 fragments removed. Circumferential erythema, and early ulceration over both knees consistent with prolonged pressure. Bilateral flexion contracture, unable to fully extend at presentation. Upper extremities, shoulders held in sustained abduction, deltoid and trapezius spasm, decreased grip strength bilaterally. Creatine kinase on admission, 6,140. Normal, for a child, is under 200. Creatine kinase is what leaks out of muscle when muscle starts to break down. When you hold a body in one position, past the point of exhaustion, the muscle does not simply get tired. Cells rupture and dump their contents into the blood, and the kidneys, which are essentially very fine filters, have to try to pass all of it. And if there is enough of it, the filters clog and the kidneys stop. It is called rhabdomyolysis. It kills marathon runners. It kills people trapped under rubble. It is the reason earthquake rescue teams sometimes put an IV in an arm before they lift the concrete off. Keaton Teal, 7 years old, 39 pounds and change, was in the early stage of it because a man had told him to kneel, and had then gone inside and had dinner, and had watched television, and had, at some point, gone to bed. Dr. Talwar started fluids. She admitted him. And at 3:40 in the morning she came out into the hallway and found the father standing exactly where she had left him, and she said the sentence that turned a family problem into a case. She said, "Mr. Teal, I am required to report this. Do you understand what that means?" And Broen said, "Yes, ma'am. Do it tonight. Not in the morning. Tonight." Because he had already thought it through in the truck. A report filed at 3:40 a.m. by a physician exists in a system before anybody in Bramwell County has had breakfast. A report filed at 9 gets a phone call first. That was not paranoia. Broen had lived 11 miles from Sawtooth Ridge for 9 years, and he knew whose deer got processed for free at the Dunmier locker every November, and one of them was Sheriff Delroy Tarkington. Adair got there at 4:15. She came down the hallway fast in yesterday's clothes, and she was crying, genuinely, and Broen watched himself notice that and file it, and hated himself a little for the filing. She wanted to see Keaton. She was allowed to see Keaton. The boy was asleep with fluids running and did not wake up. She stood over him and put her hand on his hair and shook. Then she came out into the hall and said the first thing, and the first thing was, "Creed says he told him he could get up." Broen looked at her. "He says he told him 20 minutes in," she said. "He says he told him get up and go inside, and Keaton just stayed. You know how he is, Broen. He is so literal. He waits to be told the exact, Adair, the exact words. He has always been like that, and Creed feels sick about it. He has been up all night. Adair." She stopped. Broen said, "You called him. Before you drove here. You called your brother and got his version. And you drove 25 minutes, and you walked past our son to hand it to me." She did not answer that, and the not answering was the answer, and both of them heard it. He said one more thing in that hallway, and then he did not speak to her for 4 days. He said, "You told me it was a sleepover. Now I have to back up, because none of what came next makes sense unless you understand what the Dunmier family actually was, as opposed to what the sign in the gravel lot said." Hoyt Dunmier was 74 and had spent 50 of those years making the same discovery over and over, that the mountains are full of things that are worth almost nothing where they lie, and a great deal of money 4,000 miles away, and that the only hard part is the middle. He had started with ginseng in the 60s, digging it out of national forest as a boy, selling it to a buyer who came through twice a year in a Buick. Then Galax leaves, which get shipped to florists in Europe by the ton. Then, in the 80s, when the Asian markets for traditional medicine reorganized around new supply, he found the thing that made him bear. Here is the part most people do not know, and I did not know before this story. A black bear gallbladder, the organ, dried, about the size of a fig, is worth, depending on the year and the port, somewhere between $800 and several $1,000s. Bear paws are worth hundreds each. The bile is used in traditional preparations. The paws end up in a soup that costs more than a car payment a bowl. North Carolina has one of the densest black bear populations on the continent. The animals are, from the poacher's point of view, growing on trees. It is a federal crime to sell them across state lines. It is a state crime to take them out of season, at night, with bait, with dogs, or over the limit, all of which is how you take them at scale. The Lacey Act makes moving them interstate a felony and stacks the penalties. There are exactly enough wildlife officers in western North Carolina to cover an area the size of Connecticut, and they are covering it with pickup trucks and patients. And the perfect front for the whole operation, the single best cover a man could design, is a licensed, inspected, USDA-adjacent game processing locker, with a walk-in cooler, a blast freezer, and a legitimate reason for 40 trucks a week to back up to a bay door in the dark, carrying dead animals. Nobody looks twice at a deer going into a deer plant. The Dunmiers had been running product off Blackrock Bald and out through that white cinderblock building for 30 years. Hoyt had taught Enoch. Enoch, who was heavy and slow and did what he was told, ran the saws and kept the books he was allowed to see. And Creed, who was 38 and lean, and who had the particular animal alertness of a man who has never in his life been the one who gets caught, had, 5 years earlier, done the thing that turned a family sideline into an enterprise. He had found a buyer who would come to them. Milan Kovac was 46, drove a gray Audi with Mecklenburg plates, and described himself on the one business card anybody ever saw as an import-export consultant in specialty foods. He came up from Charlotte the last Thursday of every month. He paid in cash, in banded stacks, out of a soft-sided cooler bag. He took, on a good month, 40 gallbladders and 80 paws, vacuum-sealed, frozen, packed in with legitimate summer sausage, and drove them to a warehouse near the airport, where they went into a container of frozen food product bound for a port that did not ask. 40 gallbladders is, at Creed's price, somewhere north of $50,000 a month, cash, against a business that declared $91,000 of income a year. And Adair Teal, who had a 2-year associate's in accounting and a brother who had asked her sweetly for help with the books because the woman from Boone had moved away, had spent 14 months learning exactly how that money got made to look like sausage. That is how they had her. Not with a threat, with a spreadsheet she had built with her own hands. The last piece is the land, and the land is why she could not simply walk. The Dunmier property is 110 acres, and 11 of them, the parcel with the house Brogan and Adair lived in on Fentress Road, had been carved off and given to Adair as a wedding gift by her father, or so Brogan had been told for 9 years. It had not been given, it had been sold, on a private note, held by Hoyt Dunmier, at terms that meant a balloon payment came due in the 11th year. The 11th year was now. Adair had never told her husband. She had been paying it down out of the second checking account, $4,000 a month, money that came to her in an envelope from her brother, in exchange for the bookkeeping, in exchange for silence, in exchange for a boy who came up on Saturdays and had small enough hands to work a vacuum sealer. She had told herself, the way people do, that she was protecting the house. She had also, and this is the thing that finally broke Brogan Teal in half, been sleeping with Milan Kovac since the previous March. He did not know that part yet. In the 4 days after the hospital, he knew only what a 7-year-old had whispered in his ear, and he went at it the only way he knew how, which was to stop being a father for 2 hours a day and be a technician instead. He started with the boy, carefully, in the truck, on the way to the follow-up. He did not ask what was in the freezer. That is the single smartest thing Brogan Teal did in this entire story, and a child psychologist named in the eventual filings would say so in writing. He did not lead. He said, "Tell me about a normal Saturday up there, from the start." And over about 9 days, in pieces, in the truck, Keaton told him. He got there around 10. Uncle Creed gave him a job. The job was almost always the same, sitting on an upturned bucket in the back room of the locker with the vacuum sealer, feeding bags in, hitting the pedal, stacking the sealed ones in a milk crate. Sometimes the job was carrying the crates through the cooler to the big freezer in the back. Sometimes the job was standing at the top of the drive with a walkie-talkie and saying the word truck if a truck came up. The bags had things in them. Keaton, who was 7, and who described things the way 7-year-olds do, said the bags had hands in them. He said it the first time in the parking lot of Dr. Talwar's office, and then he cried for 11 minutes and Brogan sat with him and did not ask a single follow-up question, and later that week the boy drew it, unprompted, on the back of a placemat at a diner. Black bear paws, degloved of hide, are horrifyingly close to a small human hand. 5 digits, a palm pad, claws where nails would be. If you are 7 years old and you are handed one in a clear vacuum bag and told to seal it, you will not think the word paw. You will think the other word. And then you will carry that around inside you for 14 months, while the adults in your life congratulate you on being helpful. The other thing Keaton said, and he said it flatly, as a rule of the house, you are not allowed to move until Uncle says. That was the punishment for everything. Dropping a bag, talking during a count, asking to go home. Once, for using the bathroom in the locker instead of the tree line, you knelt. Sometimes 10 minutes. Sometimes, if Creed was in a mood or if there was a load coming, you knelt until it was done. It had happened at least 9 times before the night Broen opened the shed. The boy had never said a word, because, and here is the sentence that Broen will carry to his grave, Mom said not to make it a thing. While that was coming out, the technician was working the other end. Broen Teal had installed the refrigeration at Dunmier game locker. Not all of it. Hoyt's original 1978 walk-in was still there, a cave of a thing with a 2-inch hardwood door. But in the spring 5 years earlier, Creed had wanted a blast freezer, a real one, a fast pull-down cell that takes 180 pounds of product from ambient to -30 in a few hours, instead of a few days. And he had wanted it cheap, and he had gone to his sister's husband. Broen had done it at cost. He had sourced a used condensing unit out of a closed fish house in Wanchese, run new line sets, insulated a corner cell, and, because he does not do sloppy work even for people he does not like, and because a blast cell that fails ruins everything in it, he had put in a proper controller. A Corel unit with a probe in the cell, a probe on the coil, and a door switch. And he had commissioned it, the way he commissions everything, by adding it to his company's remote monitoring account. $14 a month per site. It logs to the cloud. It sends him an alarm text if a box goes out of range, which is a service he provides free to every customer he likes and every customer he does not trust, and Creed Dunmier was the second kind. He had told Creed about it at the time. Creed had said great, whatever, and had never thought about it again, and had never once in 5 years asked to have it removed, because the little gray box by the door said Corel on it and looked like part of the machine, and to Creed Dunmier it was part of the machine. On the 5th day after the shed, at 11 at night, at his kitchen table, Broen Teal logged into a dashboard he had not opened in 3 years and pulled 14 months of data off a freezer he had built with his own hands. I want to describe what he was looking at, because in the trial it took an expert 40 minutes, and it is actually very simple. Picture a line. Time goes left to right. Temperature goes up and down. A healthy blast cell holding product sits flat and boring at -30, with a small regular sawtooth every 8 hours, where the defrost cycle runs, and the temperature climbs a few degrees and comes back down. Boring is what you want. Boring is a freezer nobody is touching. Every time that door opens, the line jumps. Warm air, 60 degrees warmer than the box, comes in and hits the probe. The size of the jump tells you how long and how wide. 30 seconds of a man reaching in for one package is a little spike. 4 minutes with the door standing open while somebody loads crates is a hill. And the recovery slope afterward, how long the compressor runs to pull it back down, tells you, if you know the box, roughly how much thermal mass just went in. Broen knew that box. He had specified every component in it. He printed the 14 months on a plotter at a print shop in Marion, one continuous roll, 11 feet long, and he taped it to the wall of his shop, and he stood in front of it with a highlighter for 6 hours. The picture that came out of the wall was this. Between the 3rd week of August and the 2nd week of December, and again in a short burst in April, that freezer got loaded at night. Not at 4 in the afternoon when a hunter drops off a deer. Between 1 and 4 in the morning, in clusters, 3 to 6 door events in 20 minutes, with heavy recovery slopes. 31 such nights in 14 months. On the last Thursday of every month, without exception, the door opened between 9 and 14 times inside 40 minutes, and the thermal mass went the other way. Something big came out. That is Milan Kovac loading a cooler bag. And then there was August 14th of the previous year. On August 14th, the door opened at 2:51 in the morning and did not close for 41 minutes. The cell went from -31 to +9. The recovery took 11 hours, and the compressor ran so hard on that slope that the controller logged a high head pressure warning at 4:20 a.m. which is a thing that happens when a 50-degree object with a lot of water in it is put into a box that small. Broen stood in front of 11 feet of paper in a cold shop at 2 in the morning and did the only arithmetic available to him, and then he sat down on an upturned bucket, which is a detail I find hard to shake because it is the same thing his son had been sitting on. Then he opened his laptop and typed, Bramwell County missing August. Elam Bracewell had been a North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission officer for 19 years. He was 51. He had a wife named Andrea and 2 grown daughters and a reputation, among the people he had cited, as an absolute nuisance of a man who could not be reasoned with, which is the highest compliment that job offers. He had gone missing on the night of August 13th. His truck was found 4 days later on a Forest Service road on the backside of Black Rock Bald, with the keys in it and his hat on the seat. The official theory, which the sheriff's office had promoted energetically, was that Bracewell had walked into the gorge in the dark and gone off one of the ledges, and that the terrain being what it is, they might find him and they might not. They never did. The case had gone quiet in about 5 weeks. Andrea Bracewell had not gone quiet. She had put up $11,000 of reward money from a retirement account. She had a Facebook page with 400 followers. She had, twice, been asked to leave the sheriff's office. Broen read for 2 hours, and then he found the piece that made his hands go cold. In the 3 months before he disappeared, Elam Bracewell had filed 6 separate reports on illegal bear take in the Black Rock drainage, and had twice requested, and twice been denied, by the county, for lack of probable cause, assistance in inspecting a licensed game processing facility on Sawtooth Ridge Road. The last request was dated August 9th. The freezer opened for 41 minutes on August 14th, and Broen Teal, sitting in his shop at 3 in the morning, understood 2 things at once. The first was that he was no longer dealing with a family court problem. The second was that he was the only person alive with a 5-year-old service account, a cloud login, and a legal right to the maintenance records of the one witness that had been standing in that room the entire time, blinking, writing everything down. He did not go to the sheriff. He went to a lawyer, and the lawyer he went to was Zadie Okonkwo, who had an office over a hardware store in Marion, and who had spent 6 years as a state prosecutor before deciding she preferred sleeping. She listened for 90 minutes without writing anything, which unnerved him, and then she said, Mr. Teal, you have a beautiful pile of nothing. He started to argue and she held up a hand. You have a data set from a device you own the account for, on a box that is not on your property, showing that a freezer was busy. A freezer being busy is not a crime. A freezer being open for 41 minutes is not a crime. Nothing on that roll of paper has a name on it. You cannot get a warrant for a temperature graph, and the second you walk into Delroy Tarkington's office with it, the box goes in a river. So what do I do? You do nothing with the freezer, she said. You do the boy. The boy is real. The boy is documented. The boy has a CK of 6,000 and a physician's report and 22 rocks in a cup. Go get your son. Everything else is a machine, and machines will wait. That was on a Tuesday. On the Thursday, she filed for emergency custody. And on the Friday, Adair Teal made her choice. She did it in the parking lot of the elementary school, in front of Miss Abernathy, in a way that got repeated to a magistrate later. She told her husband that if he pursued this, if he dragged her family through it, she would tell the court about his temper, about the hole he had punched in a wall in 2019, about the 2 months he had been on anxiety medication after his father died. She said, and this was quoted verbatim in the Guardian ad litem's report, "They will believe a mother." Broen said, "I know." Then he said the other thing, and he had not planned to say it, and he was not proud of the way he said it. He said, "Does Kovic know you are doing this, or is that a Thursday conversation?" She went white. He had found it 11 days earlier and had sat on it, the way he sat on everything, filing. The second checking account, which was in her name and which he had a legal right to see because it was funded from a joint deposit twice. $4,000 a month in, cash deposits, always within 2 days of the last Thursday. And on the statement, twice, once in March and once in June, a card charge at a hotel on Tunnel Road in Asheville on a Thursday night, 61 miles from Sawtooth Ridge, at a time when she had told him she was sitting with her mother's hip. He had not confronted her, because he had already understood something about the shape of what was coming. A wife who is scared is unpredictable, and a wife who is scared and cornered will run to her brother. He had wanted her exactly where she was for as long as possible. He had also, quietly, on a Thursday in the last week of the month, parked a work van with a magnetic sign on it in the lot across from that hotel, and photographed a gray Audi with Mecklenburg plates for 2 hours. The Dunmiers moved 4 days later, and they moved harder than he expected. Here is what they did, and I have to hand it to them. It was not stupid. On a Monday morning, an anonymous tip came in to the Bramwell County Sheriff's Office, stating that Elam Bracewell's disappearance was connected to a refrigeration contractor who had done work on the mountain and who had been seen on the Forest Service road that August. On Monday afternoon, Sheriff Tarkington's office pulled the Bracewell file. On Tuesday, they pulled Brogan Teal's business records, which, because he is a meticulous man, showed a service ticket at Dunmier Game Locker dated August 12th, 2 days before the officer vanished, and a fuel card purchase in Bramwell County at 9:40 p.m. on August 13th, which was Brogan driving home from a walk-in repair at a Mexican restaurant in Spruce Pine. On Wednesday, Creed Dunmier gave a formal statement saying that Brogan had asked him, in August, whether the game warden ever came around, and had seemed agitated. On Thursday morning, a deputy served a search warrant on Teal Cold Systems. They took 2 laptops, a plotter roll 11 feet long, a phone, and a specimen cup with 22 pieces of gravel in it. And on Thursday afternoon, in front of a magistrate, Adair Dunmier Teal's attorney submitted an affidavit stating that her husband was under active investigation in the disappearance of a state officer, and Keaton Teal was placed in his mother's primary physical custody pending a full hearing. Brogan Teal sat in his truck outside the courthouse and did not move for 11 minutes. Then he called Zadie Okonkwo and said 4 words. They took the graph. And Zadie Okonkwo, this is my favorite moment in the entire file, was quiet for 2 seconds and then started laughing. Brogan, she said, honey, they took the graph into evidence. Here is what Creed Dunmier did not understand about the machine he had let his brother-in-law build. A county sheriff who wants to bury a graph can bury a graph. He can lose it in a property room, he can mark it non-evidentiary, he can hand it back with an apology in 9 months. What he cannot do is bury a graph he has entered into evidence in a homicide-adjacent investigation of a missing state officer. Because the moment Elam Bracewell's name went on that warrant, the case stopped belonging to Bramwell County. A missing wildlife officer is a State Bureau of Investigation matter. Anything seized under a warrant referencing him gets logged, scanned, and copied into the SBI file within 10 days. And the SBI, since the previous winter, had a standing information-sharing arrangement with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service Office of Law Enforcement, because both agencies had been chasing the same Bear Parts pipeline out of the southern Appalachians for 3 years, and neither could close it. Special Agent Cora Lindquist had been on that pipeline for 2 of those years. She had a wall in an office in Atlanta with 11 pins in it and a hole in the middle where the processor should be. She had known there was a plant. She had never been able to name it, because Bear Parts, once they are vacuum sealed and frozen and packed under summer sausage, look like nothing, and because the one officer who had been closing in on it had walked into a gorge in the dark. On a Wednesday in the second week of November, an SBI analyst uploaded a scanned 11-foot plotter roll, an annotated data export, and a handwritten legend in blue highlighter, seized from a refrigeration contractor's shop. Cora Lindquist opened it at 9:15 in the morning and did not go to lunch. Because whoever had made this thing had not just graphed a freezer. He had annotated it. Every cluster of night loading events was highlighted and dated. Beside each one, in small, neat block capitals, was the corresponding legal bear season status. Closed, closed, closed. 31 nights, 28 of them outside any lawful take. The last Thursday outbound events were marked outbound, mass removed, monthly. And down at the bottom, circled twice, was August 14th, 2:51 a.m., 41 min, plus 40 degrees Fahrenheit excursion. High head pressure, 0420, recovery 11 HRS, large warm mass. Underneath that, in the same block capitals, Officer Bracewell last requested inspection of this facility, 09 AUG. At the very bottom of the roll, where a man had run out of paper and kept going anyway, the controller is a Carol Piez. It keeps a local 90-day log on the unit and a full history on my account. It has a door switch. It does not know who we are. Lindquist called Zadie Okonkwo at 4 that afternoon. Okonkwo said, "I wondered how long that would take," and put her on with her client. Brogan Teal had been arrested on a Thursday, released on a Friday, had lost his son on the following Monday, and had not slept more than 3 hours a night in 19 days. When a federal agent asked him what he wanted, he said, "I want a warrant on that freezer while there is still product in it, and I want it on the last Thursday of the month." There were two problems. The first was probable cause. The graph was suggestive. It was not enough on its own. What closed it was a 16-year-old girl. Sorrel Dunmier was Enoch's daughter. She had grown up in that house, and she had spent her entire childhood being told to go watch television, and she was not stupid. She had begun, at 14, keeping a private folder on her phone, for a reason she could not articulate, beyond a general sense that she might one day need to prove she had not made it up. There were 61 items in that folder. Photographs of milk crates full of vacuum bags. A video, taken through the crack of a bathroom door, of her uncle counting banded cash on a kitchen table at midnight. A photograph of the gray Audi. 4 photographs of her 7-year-old cousin Keaton on his knees on the shed floor with his hands on the wall, time-stamped, from 3 different dates. And 1 video, 49 seconds, from August of the previous year, taken from her bedroom window at 2:44 in the morning, in which 2 men are visible in the yard by the bay door with a tarp between them, and one of them, in a voice you can just hear over the crickets, says, "Get the door, he is heavier than he looks." She sent all 61 to Andrea Bracewell's public Facebook page on a Tuesday night in November, with a message that said, "I am sorry it took me so long. I was 15. Andrea Bracewell had that folder in front of the SBI in 4 hours. The second problem was Delroy Tarkington, and the way they solved it was to simply not tell him. The federal warrant was executed on the last Thursday in November at 7:52 in the evening, 31 minutes after a gray Audi with Mecklenburg plates came up Sawtooth Ridge Road and backed into the bay. 9 vehicles came up that cut with no lights and no sirens. US FWS, SBI, and 2 Bramwell County deputies who had been read in, one of whom was Deputy Fabiola Nunes, who had been the responding officer on Andrea Bracewell's second complaint and had been reassigned to courthouse security 11 days later. They took Milan Kovac in the lot with a soft-sided cooler bag containing 39 vacuum-sealed gallbladders and 62 paws. They took Enoch in the cutting room. They took Hoyt Dunmier, 74 years old, in a recliner, and he said nothing at all, then or ever. Creed Dunmier went out the back, across the yard, past the equipment shed, toward the tree line, which is what he had planned to do for 30 years, and he got exactly as far as the last thing he expected to find in his own yard, which was a man standing in the dark in front of the blast cell door. Brogan Teal was not supposed to be there. That is in the record. Agent Lindquist had told him plainly to stay off the mountain, and he had told her plainly that he understood, and both of them, I think, knew what that was worth. Creed stopped 6 feet from him. What came next lasted about 4 minutes, and there is no video of it, and the 2 men have never agreed on the words. What is not in dispute is this. When a deputy came around the corner of the locker 90 seconds later, the blast cell door was closed and latched from the outside. The digital readout beside it said -31, and Brogan Teal was standing in front of it with his arms folded, looking at his watch. The deputy said, "Sir, is somebody in there?" Brogan said, "Yes." "How long?" And Brogan Teal said, 2 minutes and 40 seconds. He said, "I told him he could not move until I said." He said, "I was going to give him 5 hours, and then I remembered, I am not him." Then he reached over and pulled the latch himself, before the deputy touched it, and Creed Dunmier came out of that box on his hands and knees onto the concrete, and he did not have gravel in his skin, and he did not have rhabdomyolysis, and he was not 7 years old, and every single person standing in that room understood the arithmetic of what had just been demonstrated to them. Nobody charged him. Deputy Nunez wrote in her report that the subject was located secured in a walk-in unit for approximately 3 minutes during apprehension and was released without injury, which is one of the great sentences in the history of American law enforcement paperwork. They found 411 vacuum-sealed bare gallbladders and 862 paws in that building, in the blast cell, and in the padlocked chest freezer in the equipment shed, which is the freezer a 7-year-old had meant. Under the top layer of butcher-papered venison in the shed freezer, at the bottom, in a black contractor bag, they found a pair of size 11 boots, a folded green uniform shirt, a hat, and a laminated North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission identification card with Elam Bracewell's face on it. Creed had kept them. Men like that always keep something. He had told his father it was insurance in case one of them ever talked, and Hoyt had let him, and that decision cost 4 men the rest of their lives. Enoch Dunmier broke in a federal interview room on the second day, which surprised nobody who had ever watched him try to lie about anything. He told them Bracewell had come up the mountain alone on the night of the 13th, off the clock, without telling dispatch, because he had been told no twice by the county, and had decided to look at the bay door himself. He told them Creed had hit him with a boning steel in the dark and had not meant to, and then had very much meant to. He told them the body had gone into the blast cell at 10 minutes to 3 in the morning because it was the only place on that property that would hold a thing without changing it, and that it had come out 2 days later. And he told them where it went, and the tell was, in the end, the same kind of thing that had started all of it. Paperwork nobody had thought about. A concrete delivery ticket, dated August 16th, 6.5 yards, for a new loading dock apron at Dunmier Game Locker and custom cutting. A slab that nobody in that family had ever been able to explain the sudden need for. They brought a saw up Sawtooth Ridge on the 9th of December. Andrea Bracewell was allowed to stand at the top of the cut and watch, and she did, for 6 hours, in a folding chair, in 29-degree weather, and when they found him she did not make a sound. Creed Dunmier pleaded to second-degree murder, conspiracy, Lacey Act trafficking, and felony child abuse, and got 51 years. Hoyt Dunmier got 22, and will die inside. Enoch got 11 with cooperation credit. Milan Kovac, who turned out to have moved product for 11 other suppliers across 4 states, got 19 in federal custody, and is the reason there are now pins in the rest of Cora Lindquist's wall. Sheriff Delroy Tarkington was not charged with anything because he had been careful and lost his re-election by 2,000 votes to a woman named Fabiola Nunez. Adair Dunmier took a plea on 2 counts of accessory after the fact and 1 count of misdemeanor child neglect and served 14 months. She wrote to her son every week. Brogan never intercepted a single letter and never once read one first. And when Keaton was 10, he asked to go see her, and his father drove him 4 hours and waited in the parking lot and drove him home and did not ask what was said. That is, as far as I am concerned, the hardest thing any man in this story did. The custody order was vacated on the 18th of December, 19 days after Brogan lost it. He picked his son up from a foster placement in Marion at 4 in the afternoon with a chocolate cake on the passenger seat, under a plastic dome, and Keaton got in and looked at it and said, "Is that the one from before?" And Brogan said, "That one went bad, buddy. This is a new one," and then had to pull over on the shoulder of 226 for a while. Keaton Teal is 11 now. His knees have 2 shiny patches on them that will be there forever. He does not like being told to wait for permission, and there is a school counselor who has worked with him on that for 4 years, and who describes his progress as good and slow and real. He can read a temperature graph. His father taught him, on the 11-foot roll of paper that came back from the SBI evidence room in a cardboard tube, which now hangs in the shop at Teal Cold Systems where a calendar used to be, and which Brogan will show you if you ask. Somewhere around the 3rd foot, he will put his finger on a flat, boring stretch of line and say, "That is a freezer nobody is touching," and then he will slide his finger 4 inches to the right, to the place where the line jumps off the top of the page and takes 11 hours to come home. And he will say, "And that is a man who thought nobody was watching, in a room with a machine in it." So, the question I asked you at the top, how long can you hold it? I actually went and looked this up after I read this file, because I could not stop thinking about it. And the honest answer is that a healthy adult male on a hard surface starts losing the ability to feel his lower legs somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes, and that the clinical literature on prolonged forced kneeling, most of which comes, and I want you to hear this, from human rights medicine rather than pediatrics, puts serious muscle breakdown at around the 2-hour mark. Keaton Teal held it for 5 hours and 50 minutes, 6,140. That is the number the machine in his blood came back with, and it is the only number in this entire story that anybody ever had to argue about, because every other number came off a device that had no idea it was in a fight. That is the thing I keep turning over. Not the bears, not the money, not even the concrete. It is that for 14 months, 4 adults on that mountain got away with all of it because every witness was a person, and people can be talked to, and people can be paid, and people can be married to you. And the one thing they never thought about, the thing that finally took the whole ridge down, was a $14 a month gray box by a door that did nothing but write down the truth every 60 seconds, to nobody, forever. Your life is full of those. Card readers, odometers, thermostats, the metadata on the photograph, the delivery ticket for 6.5 yards of concrete. None of them love you, and none of them are afraid of anybody. And that is exactly why they are worth more than 100 sworn statements. And the other thing, which is smaller, and which I would like you to actually take with you, when Broen Teal opened that door and saw his son on the gravel, he did not say, "Let's go." He said, "I am going to say the word, and then you can move." Because his boy had been handed a rule by a man who liked owning him, and you cannot break a rule like that by ignoring it. You have to take it out of the other man's hand and put it in the child's. Tell the people you love that they never have to wait for permission to stand up. Then go be the kind of person whose house does not require any.